us through the webcast from around the world, and I want to thank Telefonica, our webcast sponsor for tonight. As you can see over here to my left, cell phones will not be banned for tonight's event. We'll be live tweeting the event, so it's in the agenda, and over there, you can tweet with the handle at ASCOAYPA, and I would also like to thank TweetBeam for the live Twitter feed that we'll have throughout the panel. We invite you to join the conversation with the hashtag YPAIWNY, and if that sounds like a lot of letters, you can always refer to the board over there. So tonight, our speakers will explore the challenges and opportunities presented by the entrepreneurial ecosystem connecting Silicon Alley and Latin America. But first, we'll open the conversation from the investment side with some comments from the president and CEO of this institution, Susan Siegel. So, let me tell you a little bit more about Susan. Before taking the reins of the ASCOA, Susan spent over 30 years in the private sector with Latin America and other emerging markets. She was a founding partner of her own investment and advisory group focused primarily on Latin America and the U.S. Hispanic sector. Previously, she was a partner and Latin American group head at JP Morgan Partners, Chase Capital Partners, where she pioneered early-stage venture capital investing in Latin America. She continues to be an enthusiastic mentor and supporter of entrepreneurs, particularly in LATAM. So with that, I'll pass it on to Susan, and I hope you enjoy the panel.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thank you all for being here. First of all, I think we should take 30 years out of my agenda. It's 35, and it makes me feel really old, particularly when I'm looking at all of you. So we'll just forget that part of it, and we'll move on to how important entrepreneurship is in Latin America. There is nothing, in my opinion, short of, as we were just discussing upstairs, the internet and technology that will change Latin America more than entrepreneurship, and particularly high-powered, high-impact entrepreneurs. I've watched from the sidelines, invested in a number of companies and watched a number of companies, and the door is just beginning to open in Latin America for a number of reasons that we can discuss at a different panel, whereas in the United States, there's lots of liquidity, lots of opportunities. In Latin America, that has been much more challenging because of the markets. But the opportunity, as we've seen from companies like Mercado Libre that have been incredibly successful in Latin America, there's an enormous opportunity. And there are no markets where the internet is growing faster than places like Brazil. And so the opportunity for all of you and for all of you is enormous. And as I said, for me, it's a real thrill. YPF is the star of the organization. It's the future of the organization. And the young people in the organization that have really put this together have just done a spectacular job, and we can only see that in seeing all of you here tonight. So thank you very much. Patrick is a dear friend. We were Chase Capital Partners together and did so much together, and I'm so happy that you're involved with YPA and that you're chairing this tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I pass it to you.
Well, good evening and welcome to everybody here and everybody watching online. As Susan mentioned, we work together at Chase Capital, and it's a pleasure to be here. We're sitting across from somebody who taught me so much and is probably the greatest mentor I could ever hope for. So to start off tonight, I wanted to give you a couple of stats. I've spent some time this week talking to different people as some friends from Brazil and I meet with different folks in the New York ecosystem. And what we've learned are things like the fact that venture capital has grown by over 4 times in the last 10 years. We've learned that New York has become sort of the second largest tech hub after California, surpassing Boston. And we've learned that companies are choosing more and more to have a foot in New York because of the fact that it's a leader in so many different industries, from finance and fashion all the way through to media and food. So New York is an exciting place to be. We're here at Intranet Week, and we've put together a panel of people who are literally building the bridge between Latin America and New York. And when Margaret and I first started talking about this program tonight with YPA, what we wanted to do is find a bunch of people who were doing what we so passionately believe is important today for Latin America and the United States, which is to build a bridge between the two. So I'm going to ask, just to start out, each person on the panel to tell us a couple of things. Basically, I'd like to know, what do you do? Where do you spend your time, in which cities? And how are you building a bridge between New York or the US and Latin America? So I'll just go right down the line, starting Aldo.
Or ladies first. I spend most of my time, I'm Aldo, I'm from Monterrey, Mexico, and I've been living here in New York for 7 years, almost 8 years. And I spend most of my time here in New York, in Monterrey, Mexico, and in Mexico City. Right now, I've been working on creating a startup that could hopefully digitalize philanthropy initially in Mexico and help those charities become digitalized so we can then later connect them to donors. Not just to fundraise for their projects, that most of the projects down in Mexico are focused on social assistance and education, but also to help them with all the technological tools that we're trying to develop, because most of the nonprofits there don't even have budgets to hire programmers or developers and lack the knowledge of technology. So we're building these technological tools to help them fundraise, to help them engage better with donors, to help them be more transparent with their information, to help them recruit people for volunteering work opportunities, to help them find in-kind donations and help them publish all sort of events that are philanthropy related. So we're trying to create a platform that's a one-stop shop for all the inefficiencies that exist in the country where the nonprofits struggle the most to be successful on. So that's basically what I'm trying to do.
So my name is Pastrana. I'm the COO and co-founder of QVit.com. QVit.com is the first online boutique to have a virtual dressing room. So what we do is we create a three-dimensional replica of our clients' bodies, which we call an avatar. And then we create an exact replica of the designer's garments who we partner up with, and then we're able to merge the two. So through our virtual dressing room, what we do is we allow you to see the garment, how it would look on yourself via an avatar, lengths and widths. We allow you to wear that same garment in a transparent or sheer view in order for you to see the distances between your body and the garment. And finally, we have a tension view in which we allow you to kind of have the look and feel of going into a physical fitting room. So what we're doing is we're breaching the gap of the physical and the online world. I spend my time 50% in Bogota, Colombia, and 50% in New York. We're three partners, and there's always one who is in Bogota, there's always one who is in New York, and then the third one kind of is in either way depending on where they need them. I would finally conclude that QVit.com, what we do is in the front end, all of our business is set up in New York, but then on our back end, all of our technology development is back home in Colombia. So that's kind of like our key bridge between Latin America and the US.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Besserman. I am the founder of Startup Buenos Aires. Startup Buenos Aires represents the startup community in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Our objective is to inspire, connect, and support startups and entrepreneurship in Argentina, as well as around the world. We operate on 3 platforms. Education, that's where we provide classes and workshops on a wide range of topics for entrepreneurs and for startups. We host panels such as this as well. We also have another platform of community, and that's where we host and curate events, both locally and globally. We serve to bring international organizations and international events to Buenos Aires. And the last is resources, and that's where we serve as a resource hub to existing startups and new startups and entrepreneurs in Argentina as well as in the US and in Europe. We've created an outsourcing hub, so we have a database of talented developers, designers, dev shops, design shops, freelancers, where we do business with companies from the US and from Europe who are looking to outsource development. Most of my time is spent in Buenos Aires, Argentina, unless I have an opportunity to come back home to my hometown in New York.
Hi everyone, my name is Diego, and I'm the founder of a startup called WeHostels. That basically we build mobile apps that help young travelers book affordable accommodations like hostels and hotels and bed and breakfast from your phone. So we're basically making a marketplace in which all these small properties around the world can get bookings, and travelers can get a last-minute way to book a place to stay. And last year we were acquired by an American company called Student Universe that is based in Boston, which is the largest student travel agency in the world that sells tickets and travel packages for students and under 26. So that was a kind of a great match for the two companies. And the last 3 years building the company, I spent my time between Chile, because we were part of Startup Chile, Argentina, where we have developers, and Colombia, where we also have developers, and we had a small office. And now I spend my time also in some other countries in which I'm going to either participate in an event or mentor some entrepreneurs. And that's the way I'm also trying to give back by helping others that are a little earlier in the journey.
Hi everyone, my name is Andres Blanc. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I've been living in New York for the last 5 years. I started my first company here in 2009, which was called Pixable. And Pixable was the best way for you to consume all the photos that your friends were sharing on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of them aggregated and beautifully on mobile. Pixable got acquired in 2012 by Singtel. And very recently I started a new company called Caliber, which is helping professionals that don't know each other to connect in a better way. Think of a little bit like Tinder, but more focused on professional networking. Yeah, it's pretty early, but pretty exciting to be back on the saddle again. And where I spend most of my time, definitely in New York. Starting a company, you just have to be put as much as you can. But we have a big team in Buenos Aires, so some time there. Family in Miami, so I go there a lot, and it's really great to see a bigger ecosystem growing in the Miami area too. And yeah, and other ways in which I think that I'm bridging between the US and Latin America is definitely, as Diego, we get contacted a lot by different people who are starting companies, and it's really great to just hear what they're doing. And also even people in New York, Latin people in New York that are starting companies, we also try to meet up and try to help and be very open, because as a startup founder, sometimes you have to be pretty shy about the big problems that you have, and it's great to have a Latin community of people who are starting companies that are kind of they're in the road for you and willing to help in a pretty generous way. Excellent.
Okay, well that's great. I forgot to mention up front, we're all on Twitter, and if you look and follow the ASCOA YPA @ you'll find all of our Twitter handles. And we actually have a Twitter celebrity on the panel here tonight. Lisa was listed as a top 100 most influential women in tech on Twitter by Business Insider. So if you follow her on Twitter, she's probably a lot more interesting than me, but
that's not true.
but definitely worth looking up. So, and following the YPA hashtag as well. I'm going to ask some questions and kind of target them to different people here based on the topic. We had a little mention earlier about Startup Chile. There's obviously Startup Brazil. There's Ruta N in Medellin. So there are initiatives by governments, and there are also private sector initiatives. There are groups like NXDP Labs in Argentina. And so we're seeing the ecosystem mature. I like to throw this question to both Aldo and Lisa. How do you think Latin America is positioning itself as a hub for startups? What are we doing right in the region, and where do you see sort of areas for improvement?
Well, I think that there's a lot of elements that is positioning Latin America to be the next startup hub. I'd say first and foremost, it's the talent. There's just such a strong concentration of not only tech talent, but also entrepreneurial talent. There's incredible amounts of innovation going on. There's a strong community. But first and foremost, it's just a very, very talented area. Next, I also think the language is definitely an issue as well. Spanish is spoken throughout the whole continent except for in Brazil. And it's also the second most spoken language here in the US. So just having that market of Spanish speakers, it gives a bigger range of targeted people to connect with. That, and also I'd say the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Latin America, it's a lot easier to set up a company in Latin America, financially speaking. There's a lot less risk as far as the initial costs. Setting up a team is a lot cheaper. A lot of people are outsourcing their development to Latin America already, and with all of those elements, I think it's really creating the next startup hub, and we're going to see a lot more innovation coming out of there. We're going to see a lot more companies and success stories, and it's already happening, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Very good.
I have a different view. We operate in Mexico, and we have a bunch of developers there, and we've been fortunate enough that that the government has set up a lot of initiatives to help startups with capital and subsidies and stuff. We've been fortunate to be part of those subsidies. But one of the things that I've been seeing a lot is that a lot of it is cosmetic, a lot of it is just marketing, and there's a bunch of initiatives and by the government and by different type of accelerators that are getting themselves started to try to make investment in startups. But the money is not really going to the startups. There's not the risk adverse element yet into it, and I feel that if we're going to talk about the development of a startup hub, the talent is there, but I don't think the financing for the startups is still there yet. There might be at an angel or seed investment level, but for follow-on investments, there are really not that many. And I can tell you, for example, in Mexico, there's only 6 technology funds that they all have capital from the same government, and they all have the same investment restrictions. And they have to spread their investment apart, like in different type of investments. But given that, there's really not an ecosystem for other investors to really participate, and the lack of knowledge of how technology and valuation works makes it even challenging. And even more challenging is trying to set up a good capital structure within companies. Until recently, a few years ago, Mexico was able to set up legal entities where investors and founders would have different preferences in equity, and but many countries don't have that. So what I've been seeing is a lot of founders actually are incorporating in the US, trying to raise capital in the US, and then run operations in Latin America. So I don't know if there's really an ecosystem really or a startup hub being developed, just because there's so many elements that are still missing on the equation.
So I'll throw this one to Diego. Diego, you raise money for WeHostels in Argentina, in Latin America, and in other places around the world. So you sort of saw, I would imagine, the differences between the regions. Can you sort of jump in and comment on what Aldo was discussing?
Yeah. 2 things. In one hand, I agree with you. I mean, we're really behind in terms of capital as compared to not only the US, but other regions of the world. I think we were successful at raising a round that was interesting because we tap into a very wide network that was not only in one country, but we had investors actually from Argentina, from Brazil, from the US, from Europe. And we managed to have sort of a lead investor that knew a lot of people, that gathered all this trust around the project. So that was key. Now, the other thing I want to say is that the good news, I believe, is that the cost of starting a company is going down significantly. And in the 90s, when Mercado Libre started, you needed $5 million to start a company, to buy servers and stuff. A couple of years ago, you needed $500,000. And now you virtually need nothing. With cloud-based services, we saw new companies emerge. WhatsApp emerged, with just two guys coding an app. So I think as we start to realize that entrepreneurs in Latin America start to realize that they don't need capital to start companies and launch global products, I think we're going to see more and more innovation coming.
I think most of the investment is really going into human capital, and capex on infrastructure is just pretty minimal.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a lack of funding in Latin America, that's for sure. But also there's this new emergence of these government-led programs, such as Startup Chile, Startup Brazil. And I think having the support of the government is really important when it comes to building a company. And I wish Argentina had that support, and hopefully we will. But you can see the strong emergence of the government programs all throughout Latin America, and I think it's only going to grow.
Yeah. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about one of the things that we see a lot in companies that are here in the US is a founder who then puts the tech team in their home country or another country in Latin America. Andres and Laura, you, I believe, if I'm correct, you are in Buenos Aires and you're in Colombia. Can you talk about, was that decision driven by a cost savings determination, or were there other factors that really drove you to think, this is the right place to build my business from a tech perspective?
In our case, I would certainly say there was we decided to take it certainly for cost savings, but I would say it was not the main reason. The three of us are Colombians, and the idea was for us to build a US-based company with Colombian developers. Our first, let's say, goal was get the best of the best, and in our case, our investors, who are angel investors, were a bit skeptic of us being a US company and having our development back home, because they were not sure that the talent was available. So at first they were skeptical of this move, but then we were able to prove them that Latin America and Colombia has a very important talent. So initially it was certain for cost reasons. In the end, we were able to prove that there's great talent, and we shifted it there kind of to give back to our country. There are other challenges in which maybe we'll talk upon, which is the different working cultures between the US and Colombia, which made it a bit harder in certain senses and a bit easier in others. But no, it wasn't solely cost related.
Definitely cost is an important factor, especially when you're starting up. Like for us, it was an advantage, right? Like we want to be based in the U.S. and being able to have like a team of 3 or 4 people developing, and of course, like I think that proximity is very important. Like as our company grew, like we had more and more team in house, but we were able to get a lot done. And even after we had the resources to have the team in house, we still kept a lot of people there because they're extremely capable. Work culture is challenging, but a lot of people have great work ethics and they take a lot of responsibility. So as always, there's always outliers, and you can find really, really great people. Also, when you're outsourcing, you can choose the whole world. So it's not for us choosing Argentina. It's like the talent there is really good. They use like very modern platforms, and at the same time they're in the same time zone. Very different from like in India or Poland or Ukraine, that they also have pretty good talent. The language barrier is very helpful. But yeah, like I think that probably even when I have resources, I will always have some part of the team in Latin America, just because we've been able to find really great people and retain them across many years. So that's been a great advantage.
Now, we talk about this outsourcing. It's kind of the same, the usual suspects. Argentina, Colombia has become sort of well known. I mean, even people who have no ties to the region are using those countries as places to build their outsourced tech. Are there other countries that you've considered? I mean, you're from Venezuela. Have you thought about working with Venezuela or developers there, or anybody else in the panel? Have you looked at other geographies in Latin America as a place to find great tech talent?
We worked with Venezuela, and it was more like an outsourced team directly, like a company that had a bunch of developers. It was harder for us to pick individually people and concentrate them in an office, which eventually for us is important to do. But yeah, so I think that was a challenging part. And from a cost basis, like Venezuela is absolutely even cheaper than India right now, right? So that would be a huge advantage. But being able to concentrate a lot of people and organize them is a bit more challenging.
Also, we're discussing costs, and I think it'd be interesting to hear the different costs between doing business as far as having a developer in the U.S. versus in Latin America. And just based on my understanding from Argentina, I'd say an intermediate to senior mobile app developer here would cost anywhere from $200 to $500 an hour. That's for senior level. That same quality senior level mobile app developer in Argentina you can get for $50 an hour. So I mean the cost is just a very obvious factor, especially when it's that large.
Yeah. Diego, do you have any thoughts on this?
What I would say is that there are certain countries that have a lot of internal demand, like Brazil and Chile. Chile, the banking sector and the mining sector needs a lot of developers, and they actually are importing developers from Colombia, from other places. And Brazil also, kind of the internal market is growing a lot, so they don't have enough talent to serve services outside, right? Whereas in Argentina and Colombia, I think that's the case. But I think we're going to see more cases like Costa Rica. Costa Rica is also building a hub of development and selling services abroad. And I think to your point, is the ability to gather kind of a big group of people and educate them on the new technologies and platforms. I think that's going to be key in certain countries.
Got it. Now, Laura, you touched on a pretty subtle topic, but one that is extremely important in managing a startup, which is making your teams sort of getting the most out of the people you work with. And I'd love to just go down the panel. This is kind of for everybody. How do you see the differences of managing in a place like New York City and a place like your various sort of places where you have operations in Latin America?
Well, in my case, we do have a team of developers in-house in Colombia. So in our case, when we try to outsource our technology development, I would say the 3 times that we tried, it failed. And it failed mainly because people underestimated our project, and they said, oh, it's going to be very easy. We're going to get it done in a couple of months. And after a couple of months, nothing happened. So we had to come to the challenge to kind of get a group of best developers and kind of have everything done in-house. Having said this, we ran into a number of problems because I'm speaking particularly in Colombia. Employees in Colombia work for a paycheck particularly. So kind of like the startup idea or the startup dream is harder to kind of transfer because they live paycheck to paycheck. So we have to work more hours, but probably we can't pay you all the extra hours, or the fee we pay you is not kind of like the standard fee, is something very hard to transmit. So the idea was, we've always said in our business, we want to have the American ideology of working environment, let's say props, of bonuses, of paychecks, of all that, very competitive salaries, in order also for them kind of to understand the larger working hours and to become part of a dream. For us, it has also been complicated in Colombia. Giving our employees stocks from a US company is not as clear as it is here. So there's no really a way in which you can make them actually feel part of the American company through stocks, because it's not, due to a certain laws, is not that yet so clear. So I think it's more kind of like teaching them it's not all about the paycheck, it's not all about the money, it's about a dream, it's about an ideology, it's about a way of working, a way of living. And I think it's also gathering the best ones and people who buy your dream in the end. I think that's...
Aldo?
I've experienced exactly the same thing. It's really hard to transmit that lifestyle and culture that you are trying to achieve. And sometimes you try to explain it, but the reality is I faced that same challenge of like, you cannot structure compensation packages that easy. Also, the labor laws don't permit it. And it makes it hard for people to feel the same passion of what you're doing when they're just going for a paycheck because they have a set hours and that's all they want. And it's very hard to explain them what options are and what's the reason behind them and how valuable it can be. It really doesn't matter and I think the difference is because a really startup culture hasn't been developed. So there's a misconnect in that, and I think maybe things would have been a little bit easier if they had that mentality, but it's something, it's developing, and I think it'll be there at some point, but we've been struggling. Not struggling, but it's just takes a little bit longer, I think.
No, on this one, I would argue that Argentina on the startup sort of ecosystem is probably more advanced than anybody else. Lisa, you're coming from, you moved from the States where startup culture is very inculcated and equity is something that people kind of get. Mm-hmm. How have you seen that within the Argentina environment?
Well, I had a different transition to Argentina because I'm from New York, so I'm used to doing business the way New Yorkers do business. And to the rest of the world, especially to Latin America, where there's a big emphasis on relationships, there's a big emphasis on knowing who you're doing business with, where I came into the game and I was sending emails and I was looked at as if I was abrupt or if I was being a little too forward via email because there's such a strong emphasis on relationships there. So it was a little difficult to transition into the way of doing business in Latin America, but as you mentioned, I do think that the startup culture there is a little more advanced. People are used to the way of how the startups are with equity, and they understand that it might not just be for a paycheck, it's for a dream, and the entrepreneurial spirit is really embedded into the society, so people understand the risks of creating their own companies and having their own startups. But it was a bit difficult being a New Yorker going into Latin America, but I think the best kind of business culture is being able to fuse the two, where you do have that emphasis on relationships that we may overlook in our own terms of doing business, but at the same time have that efficiency of doing business like a New Yorker or like a North American, because you do lose some efficiency when you put so much emphasis and pressure on relationships that the business might not even work out if that's the case. But I think if you're able to fuse the two, it really creates a really strong business environment and a strong business culture.
What about you, Diego?
So in my experience, we did manage to assemble a group of people that worked really hard for the dream. I think that the strength that we Latin Americans have is that we're very creative and very passionate about things. What we lack, on the other hand, is that we're not that methodical. We say yes to everything and then we don't follow through. So these kind of cultural things, are seen sometimes, in the dynamics of a team. But I do think that more and more people are looking at the inspiring story of creating a company and challenging the status quo and doing something awesome. So I do see happening, at least in the places we worked.
Andres?
I think a lot has to do more with the environment than the culture, because something I forgot to say is that we actually did bring a lot of people from Venezuela to work with us on an H-1 visa. And we were super lucky because in 2009 through 2012, like banks and consulting companies weren't able to get H-1. So we were able to get like tons. We got like 15. And it was really interesting that the people who were actually working either from Argentina and Venezuela that we brought in here, when they were there, they weren't really cared much about the equity, but when they were here, they actually got really motivated and they could see it. They could just understand what was happening here, and it was easier to motivate. But I do, like, for me, the challenge was, and even with my team now that is in Argentina, like, it's hard for them to understand the equity, and I think it's not, maybe even if they understand it, it's hard to explain it to the people that are around them. Like, oh yeah, like I have 1% of this company that is worth millions, that people are like, what are you talking, or even explain it to your wife, right? Oh look, like I'm getting paid less, but theoretically this company's gonna be huge. It's just, it's something that I think that not many people can understand, so I think that people are willing to understand and get it. Like, people in Latin America are extremely ambitious, and they definitely like the idea of hitting it big time, like probably even more than here. But if the environment is not there, like nobody knows there's somebody who has sold a company. That doesn't happen, and it's very rare. So,
do you think, to that question, there are some people who have? Who do you think are the inspirations for the region? Who are the people that people look to and say, this person did it and I can too?
I think the inspiration is on stories that get created here in the US that people try to replicate down there. I think Facebook, Twitter, and all those that have more of a consumer type approach. I think people have, the more that the culture starts developing, the more stories they read. They try to do that. They try to replicate. They try to come up with business models. But then they face the funding problem, and then they have to come to the US, and then you get stuck with what we're doing. You incorporate it here and working against the culture. Now, having said that, if you get to figure out, if you are able to connect all the dots of this efficiency, I think there's a huge opportunity to do business. And that's at least what I guess what we're all trying to do, going around all these challenges, trying to connect all these dots and try to make a business model out of it.
I also think that the success is measured when a company starts local and they grow global. So the Mercado Libres, the Duolingos, the companies that start in a local area and they're able to grow into an international space, I think those are the ones that people look at and they're like, that's a success story, I want to be like those people. So we can be on a much larger global scale rather than just Latin America or Argentina or Brazil.
Yeah, okay. Now, Lisa, you touched on something earlier which I can relate to, which is being an American in Argentina and being perceived as aggressive. And I certainly have made that mistake. But yesterday I was having coffee with Diego and he was telling me about his experience coming to New York. And even writing a simple email is different than it is in Latin America. I'd love to just kind of go down the panel and hear sort of what you learned, in your own behavior and how you had to sort of adjust that to be successful outside of your, the place where you grew up.
It's very different. I think you cannot translate things the same way, and you have to be very careful because people might be very sensitive. And I guess this equity thing, you cannot just give it the right instructions because they'll be interpreted very different. So I think that's, I don't know if that's what you're referring to with the question.
In our case, I would say we're 3 women, and I'm certainly generalizing, but kind of being in the tech world, mainly in the fashion world, we realize, and in the investment, we realize men kind of always are overachievers, and their app is the best, their website is the best, and women are usually more, so yes, how is QVit? Well, yes, it's a startup, and you kind of like make it a little bit smaller. And so for us, it was 3 women coming into a room, be it investment, be it presentation, in which we totally had to switch the gear of being not only more aggressive in the American sense, but also becoming kind of manly in the sense that, oh, how's QVit? It's awesome, it's the best. So it had to kind of also change or switches, not being as risk averse and being more risky and a little kind of sometimes being more aggressive on the way we spoke.
For me, it's been two main things. The first is when, at least specifically with emails, when writing emails, it's a lot more casual with Latin America, with Argentina. So people end their emails with besos, which means kisses. And so when I got my first email from a fellow colleague or a professional and it ended with kisses, I was like, that is extremely inappropriate. But then I started writing it, and now I write it, and if I don't write besos, it looks like I'm being too formal. But now coming back to New York, when I write emails and I end with besos, I have to always go back a couple letters and just finish with best, because if people got besos, it'd be kind of weird. That's the first one. The second one is the time of emails. So here in the US, we expect an immediate response. If you don't receive a response within 24 hours, you're angry or you're unhappy. And it's unprofessional. Whereas in Argentina, they can take weeks and weeks to respond. And I mean, at first it was a bit difficult, but now I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I've become adapted to that. So now I take a couple weeks to respond too. So if anybody emails me, I'm sorry, I'll get back to you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, to me, I mean, it happened the same in the opposite direction, in the sense that, I was writing emails that were like very not to the point and very kind of, illiterature, Garcia Marquez, And now, straight to the point, hey, I need that. No, and then the other thing also happened to me, and I think, it goes beyond the gender thing, I'm not from Buenos Aires, I'm from the interior of Argentina. And I think, to me, it was like a shock when I came here and I saw the, self-promotion, the shameless self-promotion, of people. And then I learned that, this is a way, if you're not selling yourself, nobody's going to sell you, right? So, and I think that was an education. I think that's an education that we do need, Latin American entrepreneurs coming here. When it comes to press, we talked about that the other day, Patrick. The press is not going to write about you if you don't go and tell your story, and you don't tell your story, with a big vision, right? So that's one of the things I learned, and yeah, I do think that a mentorship thing that we need, you know, for Latin Americans when it comes to, you know, entering the U.S., you know, with the right foot.
Well, as an investor in Diego's company, I can tell you it was less Garcia Marquez and more Borges. But Andres?
Yeah, no, this could be like a whole topic in general. No, it's hilarious, and especially being in New York. I think New York is quite its own world by itself. For me, what's really interesting is how both cultures are indirect in different ways. Like here in the U.S., like if somebody can be really upset, but you don't really know that they're upset, so you can have like a long conversation, and then like things just blow up, and you're like, whoa. Where in Latin America, people are like super like emotional, like, hey, you didn't speak to me properly. But in the other side, people here are super direct, and things get really done. You ask them about doing something, and they're like, oh, we can get this done. In Latin America, it's the opposite. It's like, yeah, like, we can definitely do this, and then it's very indirect about talking about the different problems. So managing the sensitivities, I think that people are more sensitive here. Like you have to be very careful with your wording. But in the scheme of things, I think that things here are just much more efficient, and things get done in a much more thoroughly, I would say.
Yeah. Now, talking a little bit about the scene in New York for people with ties to Latin America, is there a New York Latin tech scene today? Do you feel like there's an ecosystem that's developing, or is it sort of just not something that sort of factors into your lives? Aldo?
I haven't really experienced any ecosystem forming. I think the only ecosystem that I wouldn't even call it ecosystem, but it's like people from your own country or friends that are willing to support the project that you're doing, but not a formal group or gatherings that happen here that could help share knowledge of what the challenges might be happening.
Yep. Anybody else have a?
No, I would agree, kind of the same.
Yeah.
Mainly.
That's what we're trying to do starting today, I guess. Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think it's we're early on. We've been, you know, these bridges are being built for a long time, but people come and they go, and they're hard to sustain, right? Mm-hmm. You guys have both sold your companies. You've had exits. And when you sold your company, you had, you know, offshore resources. You had a foot in Latin America. Was that something that the buyers even sort of took notice of? How did they think about it? Was it a topic of concern? Was it an advantage? Sort of how did that play into when you sold your businesses?
I think for us, when we were starting to get acquisition offers, most of the team was already here. So I think it was something easy, but I think it would have been challenging if our core team wouldn't have been there, especially because a lot of it was technology due diligence, because they wanted to see if we could scale it, and having the team here was a benefit. And the people who were offshore, they weren't even though a lot of people offshore stayed, they weren't really taken into account. They got maybe some compensations, but it wasn't a really important thing.
Yeah, for us, it was. We also had the core team here, and that was sort of like a part of the story. But we actually said, look, we have the ability to tap into really good talent, at a lower cost, and we can bring people. If you guys are willing to do visas, the company that bought us is willing to sponsor H-1B visas. So we can actually, it's an advantage. It's a strength that we have, and I think the company understood it and liked it, and we keep some team members on there still now. Yeah.
Very good. Now, one thing that it's often talked about in Latin America tech is what's innovation, what's truly innovative, is bringing a model that works in the US to Latin America innovation. And I would argue that there is plenty of innovation that happens, but there is also, I would say, a recognition that we haven't yet had that one sort of ground path-breaking technology come out of the region. It hasn't been a global leader like a Skype, let's say, that's come out of the region. What do you think it's going to take for Latin America to produce something that truly sort of takes on the rest of the world and is completely path-breaking?
I would say that one of the main problems we are encountering now in Latin America is that we have a lot of micro business people. So they go into the region and they say, I want to do, I don't know, arepas, and I'm going to have a little restaurant, and I'm going to grow it, and maybe have 6 little different places in Bogota. But we're never thinking like, I can move from Bogota to Medellin, and I can move from Medellin to Cartagena, and then I can go to Peru and Brazil. So I think what we're missing really is the fact of knowing that we're in an era in which we could, I don't know, be it a restaurant or be it a technology company, expand from Colombia to the world. So I also think that from the moment we start changing the fact of only being important or known in a city or in a country, most likely we're going to become bigger dreamers, and we're going to have a success story. And I also think that the ecosystem and the investment is also kind of a constraint, but I believe that if we had the idea and the group and the technology, that wouldn't be a problem. So it's kind of like an in-between.
I think it's the lack of funding. I think there's an obvious and apparent lack of funding in the Latin American region. There's not enough VCs, there's not enough angels, there's not enough incubators, accelerators. So without that money, people are very limited in what they can and cannot do. And I think if we were to bring more money into the region, then I think that there'd be a lot more successful startups that would come out of that region, because they have the capital, they have the funding, they have the services, whatever they might need to take their startups to the next level and be that next global leader.
I think, to your first question of innovation and this model of copying a model and adapting versus inventing something new, I think we need both. I think that there is a lot of services that we need in Latin America that takes a lot of innovation in the implementation, and I think we need a lot of entrepreneurs who are kind of brave enough to take in these challenges. And there are many that are building all the infrastructure that is already built in the US and in Europe. And I do think that we're going to see more and more global companies coming from the US, for the point that I made at the beginning of the cost of starting a global company going down and down and down. To give you an example, Bitcoins in Buenos Aires, in this moment, there are more developers working on Bitcoin projects than there are in New York. So this is an area of innovation. It's an infrastructure in which there's a lot of innovation with a global impact that may come from Buenos Aires. I'm advising a company in the Internet of Things in Buenos Aires. I think we will see more and more. We saw recently Popcorn Time, a group of hackers in Buenos Aires that launched this sort of Netflix for pirate movies, which didn't last long because of the legal aspects. But they got 10 million users. Yeah, but they got 10 million users in a couple of days. They were covered by the New York Times and Times Magazine. So I think when people start realizing that you can do global projects for no money and put it out there, I think we're going to see more and more innovation coming.
I think it's really challenging to think like doing something completely innovative, like say at Twitter in Latin America. It's a little bit harder because there's even a lack of an environment of people sitting down and believing that you can write 140 characters into a box, and I think that it's a matter of, again, like the lack of maturity and technology in the environment in which people, what's happening now, and this even applies to New York versus Silicon Valley. Like I think it's easier in New York to create like a marketplace more than do a Twitter in New York, and in Latin America that's multiplied by 10, like how worse it is. Like I think it's more about just taking anything that's existing and digitalizing, and people, and there have been like a lot of entrepreneurs in Latin America super successful, right? Like we all grew up with knowing a lot of them, but it was just a different type of companies that they were creating. They were doing car dealerships, just doing like more type of infrastructure. And I think that with time, people are just becoming very savvy, and like the truth is that I think that the creativity now is going to spawn just because of the globalization. But again, I think that we will hit some of that wall with financing. Truth is that it's hard, right? Like again, trying to sell a Twitter in Argentina even today, like it's hard.
Aldo? I think that even the few investors that are in the region are even stopping this innovation from happening. A lot of the things that I've seen is that investors are asking founders of startups, for example, in Mexico, to build companies that have a proven business model. That means replicating business models from the US. The risk adverse is not there. So it makes it really challenging when, yeah, there might be a lot of human capital, there might be a lot of creativity from the people, but the investment community is not allowing it. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's stopping it. Also, if investing is hard in a different country by legislation or by the lack of risk adverse, it's way easier to create a company in the US, get it funded here, and take that product into market. Yeah. And in Mexico, there's not that much experience in taking products, at least digital products, to market out of a business model that has not been proven yet.
Very good. So I'm going to ask 2 more questions of the panel, and then we'll open it up to the room. So please, you've got a few minutes to come up with a brilliant question. So this is one that I'm asking because I want to figure out my investment strategy for the rest of the year. So Wences Casares, founder of Patagon, founder of Sapo, which is a Bitcoin wallet. It's getting a lot of press right now. I now own like 0.4 Bitcoins when I signed up. And I think Bitcoin has been huge in Argentina, as you mentioned, Diego. I mean, I was in Startup Chile 6 months ago, and I met like 3 Bitcoin startups. So there's obviously something happening there. We'll just go down the line, are you a believer? And if so or no, why not? Aldo, you want to start?
I mean, at least in Mexico, people have a hard time even adopting PayPal. So a Bitcoin, what are you going to do? It's not even a recognized currency in the country. So I don't think, at least in that region, is going to develop quickly. Until the US maybe accepts it, maybe it could become a potential means of payment. But until then, I just find it very, very challenging just because there's not general knowledge about technology or payment processing in the country.
I'd say the same. In Colombia, we're still very skeptical of even purchasing online through the use of a credit card. I think if it becomes popular in the US, certainly it would be something that becomes adapted, but I think it will take longer than expected.
As Diego mentioned, there are a lot of Bitcoin developers in Argentina, so I think that they're a little more quick to accept it. Me personally, I'm still skeptical about the whole thing. I think there's a lot of interest in it, and I think there's a lot of potential, but at this early stage, it's too difficult to tell where it could go.
Right, I am a believer. I am a total believer. I think, you know, as Wences Casares said actually recently, it might be the best form of money that civilization ever invented, which is a very bold statement. Very bold. But if you think about it, of all the technical capabilities that the currency has, it can really change the world. And I think the opposite of you guys. I think it's a currency that's going to be adopted in the rest of the world first. Argentina. Listen, we lost our money 3 times in the last 3 decades. Our currency is not to trust. Yeah. So I think this is the same is happening in Africa and many other countries. I think we're going to see. Also, it has different use cases. I think in the U.S. it's going to be used as an investment, maybe to keep it. The country is going to be used as a currency just to exchange. The country is going to be to send money between across borders with no charges. And I'm really, really excited about the innovation that's coming. There are 30,000 developers working on Bitcoin right now. So the smartest people in the world are actually investing and working on that. So I think I hope it succeeds.
Andres?
I'm also a big believer. I've been paying. I'm definitely not an expert, but I've been paying attention to it since it started getting a lot of buzz. And I don't know if as a currency it's something that you should be speculating on, but as a technology that allows you to transfer goods at 0 cost, it's very interesting. And I definitely think that in Latin America there'll be very interesting use cases, especially the way that people handle money in Latin America is quite different from. So yeah, but I think it's still very early on for us to really understand what's going to work and what isn't, but it is very exciting.
just the fact of explaining to people how Bitcoin is created is challenge. I just, no one, the average person would never, it would be very hard to understand.
How to create a dollar either.
Huh?
People don't understand how a dollar is created either. But I think that the easiness in which you can transfer it from point A to point B is very impressive.
So I think the takeaway here is that if the Venezuelan and the Argentine are loving the Bitcoin, I'm not saying there's a correlation with inflation, but I guess what I'll do is if Argentina wins the World Cup, I'm going to start buying Bitcoins. How's that?
When Argentina wins the World Cup.
Excuse me. Finally, my final question for the panel is, we talked about role models earlier a little bit, and you're all role models for lots of people, and I'm sure that lots of people call you for advice all the time, with showing you their business plans, asking you for advice. What advice would you give, to an entrepreneur that calls you tomorrow and says, I've got a company and I want to make it big globally, and I'm from Latin America? What's your message to them?
I think one of the first things that I feel like I made a mistake, I don't know if it was a mistake or not, it's actually outsourcing my development team to a consulting firm. And that was challenging enough because once you started creating the product, just bringing everyone in just made it really hard. And I think I feel that was my first mistake when I started this venture, and it's something that I've seen other peers of mine doing, and I've always tell them, you know what, you better stop this project with them, at least hire 2-3 people that can permanently be working with you, because I felt that it wasn't the right path for me to go in order to start a venture.
I think the biggest advice I would give someone, and particularly in the technology area, sometimes you are very shy of showing your product. And when you show your product, it's a bit too late because then you have to go back and change many things. So I would say to anyone who I would be able to give an advice is first, do a lot of prototypes, do a lot of user testing before you go and start really developing your project. And third, I would tell them, don't be ashamed to show your project before you think it's the end product, because one, you're more receptive to feedback or either criticism when you are sure it's not the final product. So they say, oh, this is bad. You say, yeah, I know it's not ready. Then when you say, this is my product, and they're like, oh, but you have this wrong and that wrong and that wrong. So I would say if you show your product and nobody has any criticism, I think you waited too long. So that would be kind of my advice to someone.
Someone very wise once told me, be rigid in your vision, but flexible in your execution. And I think that's incredibly important because you never want to lose sight of why you're doing it. But how you do it is a completely different story. And some of the greatest companies out there have been a product of pivots. So definitely keep your vision, but there's a lot of ways to execute something successfully. Also, I would say don't give up. It's tough. It's, I've had the highest of highs and lowest of lows in one day. One day you think you're making it, the next day you think you lost everything, and it's tough. But if you just keep on keeping on, it'll definitely work out in the end. And I'd say most importantly is to pay it forward. I think all of us are here and we've all experienced someone that's done something great for us, and it's creating a whole new level of entrepreneurial karma. So really pay it forward, and when you make it or when you're in a position to give advice or help someone out, do it, because it's only going to create this great ecosystem of really talented startups and entrepreneurs.
Cool, you guys are saying all the good advice. No, I was gonna say, I always say to look for mentors, look for mentorship. I think that's something that it's not that common in our culture and in the US. I think the beauty of Silicon Valley is that you can go and grab a coffee with somebody that's gonna give you feedback and somebody who's a little farther along the way. In Latin America, we don't have that many people with similar experience, but there is a chance to reach out to somebody from other country, somebody here. So look for mentorship, I think, is very important, so you get the education and you learn fast and you iterate and adapt.
I think that those are the typical advices for startups, but I think that if specifically for Latin America, what I would say is start a business that doesn't require raising money, because I think it's a huge problem. And I have a lot of friends that are really smart and they've executed super well. But they really were depending on financing, and they, like you just create your Excel model and you're like, okay, I'll raise money pessimistically in a year and a half, and then a year and a half passes and somebody had told you they were going to give you a grant and then it doesn't happen. So I think that for Latin America, definitely just, you can use technology, but don't think of financing. I think that's what I would think about.
Great. Well, we have about 15 minutes or so left. Why don't we open this up to questions from the audience? Yes, please. If you could just say your name and affiliation and your question.
Okay, my name is Nancheira, I come from Chile. When we're talking about building bridges between Latin America and New York for entrepreneurship, and at the beginning some of you mentioned that the region has talent, time zone, language, but countries are different. For instance, the way the rule of law works in Venezuela is very different from Chile. Tax codes are different in, say, Brazil, Argentina, and so on. So, do you think there is room, there is space to promote, to build a common story of the region vis-a-vis New York, for instance, or do you think that after all there should be a competition between countries and Venezuela will compete with Chile, with Brazil, Argentina, and do you think it's possible to build something in common? We are an American society, so the idea is, the challenge is, what can we do together beyond the particularities of each of our countries?
Great question.
Yeah, so what I would say is that my view is that no country in Latin America has all the good things, so each country has something that is good, right? And so I think it's going to be more beneficial for each country if we sell the story of one common region with, rule of law in Chile and really creative people in Argentina and a huge market in Brazil and really good developers in Colombia. So I think if we take advantage of this common story, and then from a population perspective, from a market perspective, when you say that Latin America has more people than China, and people don't take it at the beginning, or more people than certain other regions of the world, I think that is a better story. So I think companies are doing what governments have failed to do, of bringing the story together. And a company like Globant, for example, is having teams all across the region and selling the story of a Latin American company. So I think we're going to need that.
I think it's hard because, like, if you think of Europe, you don't think of Europe as a startup ecosystem itself, and they're farther along than us. When I think at least that they have the same currency, at least. So I think that, and like even the infrastructure. If you start an e-commerce company here, like you deal with UPS all over the place. Like you want to try to think about selling something in Latin America. There's definitely there's too many different moving pieces. So I agree that would be ideal, but I think it's very difficult.
I also think that globalization is constantly evolving, and if you just think about where we were 50 years ago to where we are today, borders are becoming less and less relevant. And I think that we've reached a certain point now, and in the next 50 years, we're going to see a much stronger emergence of globalization, and it's going to help the ease of these kind of businesses and these kind of relations throughout not only the region, but the world.
Any other comments? No. Okay. Yes, sir, way back there.
Hey guys, my name is Pablo Cerrilla. I'm originally from Mexico and I'm the Director of Market Management for a startup called Hotel Eat. I have two questions, and the second one was going to be what I'll ask first. Actually, you just talked about globalization, and I think the globalization that was experienced in Latin America over the last decades was one that was enabled by technology that didn't really destroy or disable the competitive advantages of different markets worldwide. But the digital age has put us in a situation where now there's a much more level playing field throughout the world. And I'm curious to see if you think that in Latin America there's a long-term competitive advantage that could be sustained in the startups and the different businesses that are getting started right now. And I'll ask the second question after that. By
the way, there's another Hoya. Who'd like to take that? Anybody?
Well, what I think is I believe there's always going to be a competitive advantage in the sense that our time zone helps us a lot. And I would say the second competitive advantage we will always have is the language. So we're benefiting not only from a great time zone, but from a large number of countries that speak the same language. And the proximity, let's say, as well to the US. So I would say those are three competitive advantages that we will always keep.
What I would say is that we will be able to maintain a competitive advantage as long as we can continue growing this talent that we're talking about. You know, education is going to be key. I think we're entering a time in this history of the world in which it's not about natural resources anymore, and now it's about information and knowledge. So if we do manage to, you know, improve our educational systems and keep generating engineers and talented people, we will be able to do it. But you know, that's still to be seen.
My second question was actually to that point. You guys didn't speak a lot about education. And particularly when it comes to investment, I don't think that Latin America is really going to develop from external investment really coming into the market. I don't think that the future of the startup industry down there is really going to grow only from foreign investment. I think it's really going to have to come from the regional markets. And when you look at the big VCs and the angel investors in the US that, you know, are very famous, that have done really well, they've been in the market and they've been doing this for about 10 years at least, or some 20 years. So definitely Latin American investors are behind and might just be starting. So my question's more, what is being done in terms of education, not only for, you know, the developers and the individuals that are starting startups, but really on the investor side? Like, what are these initiatives like Startup Chile, Startup Argentina? What are you guys doing to really, you know, foment and start education for investors and, you know, institutional investors maybe that are not used to investing in venture capital?
Anybody?
Well, I know in Argentina we have a pretty big organization called Emprear, and it's a network of angel investors. And they have events, they have classes, they have demos, they have meetups, so they're really fostering this environment for investors in the region. I definitely think that there could be a lot more done in that sector, but there are some things that exist that are starting to create movements, and I think it should be growing in the next couple of years for sure.
I'll just hop in on this one because I've spent some time looking at this. There are a couple of, I mean, it's kind of a regional or country level sort of phenomenon, but there are some groups like FOMIN, which is part of the IADB, which has invested in, you know, 70 or 80 VC funds across the region over the years and has really kind of created a VC industry in Latin America. There are groups like Angel Ventures Mexico that are creating really an angel investor network in Mexico, and they're funded by FOMIN, so they've sort of partnering with them on that. The question is, I think the question that remains outstanding is, will having the government funds as backers of these organizations bring private investors into the funds as well? And I think so far the answer is not really, because there haven't been enough exits and success stories. But I would say that there's been really forward-thinking public policy, whether it's by groups in Mexico like Nafinsa, whether it's groups in Colombia like Ruta N, people putting their money where their mouth is, but we just need more stories to be able to create demand from private investors to get into funds. Yes, right there. Is that Adrian, I see?
Hello, Patrick.
Hey, how are you?
David. So my name is Adrian, and I have a kind of mixed background. I was born in Mexico City, grew up there in New York City, and also I have an Irish passport. So I've been like jumping around several ecosystems. I just recently came back from Startup Chile, and I was just impressed by just the region itself, how many young people, how they embracing technology. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I've been here for many years in San Francisco and in Seattle, and in my first company I started in Europe. And I'm just so bullish on the region just because of the fact that so many young people are just embracing technology in crazy ways. My simple question is, you being South American, Latin American, what advantage did you see being a founder from there versus just a pure North American?
I think the only advantage is that you can actually go and put a business there easier, because you'll understand the language, you'll understand the people, and you'll understand the culture better. But having said that, at the end of the day, if you're really developing technology that could be adopted by consumers really quickly, I wouldn't even think you would have a big challenge of placing that technology in Latin America. So I think it just comes down to a better way of doing business down there. But if you have a technology or a good product, I think it could be placed, not probably by you, but maybe an executing team that could place it in those countries.
I was in a very opposite situation where I didn't really understand the language, I didn't have the contacts, and I founded my first company as an accidental entrepreneur in Latin America. And besides the obvious cost of doing business there and the cost of living, which helped create the company I built, it's also a more connected, in certain ways, community. It's more tangible. Within my first month of creating Startup Buenos Aires, before we even had a business model, before we even had more than 100 Facebook users, I was able to get in a meeting with the founder of Mercado Libre, Hernan Cazá, just because I was a foreigner creating something in Argentina. And if I were to do that here, I would never have the opportunity to meet with the founder of eBay just 1 month after I created something. So in that respect, being a foreigner doing something in Latin America, I think the community welcomes you, and it's a little more accessible in certain ways to be that foreigner in a different place running a business and creating a business.
Yeah, I think that being a foreigner and a foreigner from Latin America specifically, the advantage I see is resourcefulness. I think the lack of tools sometimes that we have in Latin America. In Argentina, we say atarlo con alambre, which means we're going to solve it somehow. Even though if we don't have the tools. So I think this resourcefulness is very useful when you're starting a company, and when you're an immigrant as well. You need resourcefulness to get by. So I think this is an advantage, I think.
Yeah, I agree with Diego in that. Like, I think that being a foreigner here, there's definitely an advantage of having grown up here and having an established network here versus coming outside and trying to build it out, and also understanding the proper ways in which you network and meet people. I think those are all disadvantages, and the advantages is just being very creative and thinking outside the box, because I think that the way that we do business in Latin America is not standard, right? There's not really rules written, and in startups, I think that there isn't either, right? So you try to recognize patterns, but the truth is that you just have to have your own thing, and I think in Latin America that's more typical. Yeah.
Laura, anything on that one?
No, I would say it's almost the same.
Anybody else? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so inspired by all of you. It's tremendous to listen to you. My name is Lourdes Gomez. I was born in Colombia. I'm an American citizen. I'm an immigration attorney in New York, so I know your story from the immigration perspective. You mentioned the different culture in Latin America. So I'm here sitting thinking, where did you get your entrepreneurial spirit from? Except for obviously a New Yorker. Since you were born in Latin America and you were raised there for most of your life, I'm imagining. So what do you think makes you different?
Well, in my case, I would say I started as a non-entrepreneur. I started in banking. I started at Lehman Brothers, and for obvious reasons, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt after 2 months. It was then when I met with my roommate at the time, which is my current partner, and her sister, which we had this idea, which was an online virtual fitting room. And it was always a business plan, but we never decided to develop it more. And because of the crisis, I said, most likely, there's no way I'm going to get a job. I called Mayra, which is my roommate, and I told her, remember that business plan, that idea you had with your sister? What do you think if we should pursue it or not? And then she said she was working as a financial auditor. She audited Lehman Brothers. She hated it as well. And then she said, well, let's call Lorena, that she's still in school, and let's kind of start it. In my case, it was pure an opportunity. I thought I was going to be a banker all my life. And I remember, now that you say that you're an immigration attorney, a funny call I received a couple of months into us deciding and kind of constructing our business plan. An immigration attorney calls me. I had already shifted from Lehman. I went to Barclays, and then we decided to work full-time on QVit. And he calls me and he starts asking me questions of, what do you do? What's your startup about? And then he was like, don't you think it's very risky to do a startup and leave the banking? And I'm like, well, if Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt, why can't I? So he's like, okay, he hung up. And I think also it was kind of like that sense of anyone can fail. And if I want to go back, the banking industry is there. And I would also say in my case, I had a goal, but I was a bit naive on everything it was going to take us to get there. So when I realized that it was too late for us to go back, so that was kind of like the two.
I had a little bit different, but I was a banker as well, and working super long hours and then doing private equity here in New York. But I just didn't like the fact of being bossed around and being told what to do. And it was very frustrating in the initial years because I've always wanted to do more. And I wanted to give ideas and execute those ideas. And I was always limited because of my position and because I was young. I remember like growing up, I would always put like Legos and build stadiums. And I always had these like creative like things that I wanted to do. The stadium that had like a parking lot, and then it had like the trees, and I just really liked building a lot. So one day I started researching about philanthropy, and for me it came down to doing a lot of research of why philanthropy was a very good idea to invest in technology, given that it was technology was missing so much in Mexico in that sector, and it doesn't really look that it was moving forward. So it really came out of research and the passion of building stuff, and I probably put together the longest business plan that I thought it could attract someone, and I presented it to an angel investor, and that angel investor told me that it was extremely long to read, and he didn't really enjoyed it. But at that point, it was going to be my first venture, and it's been extremely challenging, but I still am a believer that the technology that we're developing will solve a massive problem in a country for an entire sector, and that we can easily later replicate it in other countries as well. So it's just the passion of building and the passion of getting something done that could have an impact socially.
Diego, want to take the last word on this one?
All right. Well, so in my case, I do have some family members who are like role models of entrepreneurship. And I think at the personal level, it was gaining self-confidence, gradually in my life until, I reached a point in which I thought, well, even though I'm young and inexperienced, I can do something, and I can, maybe attract a group of people and do something, and just decided to jump. But it was definitely kind of looking at role models, both in my family and outside also.
Great. Well, I think I'm going to get ready to pass it back to Margaret now to do some closing remarks. I would just say thank you. This was great. This is Internet Week. The fact that we can bring, I think, a very important discussion to light for everybody here in the room and all the telespectadores. And, I hope to watch you grow your companies. And I would encourage all of you to consider joining the YPA. I've been super impressed. The team at the American Society that runs the YPA is amazing and has put together some fantastic events this year. So please do consider joining. And now I'll pass it back to Margaret.
Well, you give me a great intro, because I was just going to tell each of you that if you haven't signed up already, the YPA is a fantastic organization. Clearly I'm biased, but I've met a bunch of great people, and we host events like this. Our first year anniversary party is actually on June 26th, and it'll be here. But basically, if you enjoyed tonight, then I highly encourage you to become a member. Again, I want to thank this fantastic panel group. I think if it didn't inspire everyone here to go and start their own business or start researching, then I just think you were not paying attention. But I would like to now invite all of you to join us in the adjoining room. But I would like to thank Zona Rosa and MHW, who are our food and wine sponsors, respectively. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.